Gulf countries face a major political crisis. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain and Egypt have cut diplomatic ties with Qatar and imposed a sea, land, and air embargo. They all accuse Qatar of supporting radical groups and destabilizing the region. The Qatari government says the measures are unjustified and based on fabricated allegations.
Qatar regrets the unjustified decision made by the Arab countries to cut ties. These measures will not affect the life of the citizens and the residents in the country. Qatar is an active member in the GCC and respects the sovereignty of all nations.
Kuwait and Oman haven't joined the diplomatic and economic sanctions imposed on Qatar. Gulf nations have been drifting apart since the Arab Spring in 2011. 2 years later, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Bahrain supported the military coup in Egypt when President Mohammed Morsi was deposed. Qatar denounced the coup and called for his reinstatement. In 2014, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Bahrain recalled their ambassadors from Qatar. The crisis was contained a few months later. Qatar and the UAE remain divided over regional issues such as fighting in Libya and Syria and the future of groups such as the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. Tensions among Gulf nations have simmered recently. 2 weeks ago, news channels affiliated with the UAE and Saudi Arabia broadcast what they said were comments by the emir of Qatar about Iran, the US and Israel. The authorities here said the reports were fake. The Qatari government accused the UAE of orchestrating a campaign to divide Qatar and the United States of America. Hashim Al-Barra, Al Jazeera.
America and its best friend in the Gulf may be in for a difficult breakup. Saudi Arabia's ruling family is rather upset with changes to US foreign policy. Now, the worst-case scenario for Washington just could be a disruption to oil supplies. However, White House officials insist this whole row is all a bunch of hype. But as RT's Guyanay Chichikan explains, they've been wrong before.
Saudi Arabia hates the fact that the U.S. didn't bomb Syria. Saudi Arabia did everything possible to make it happen, and it didn't. Saudi Arabia hates Iran and any mentioning of a possible nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran. Washington and Tehran are far from any deal, really, but even the talk irritates Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia decided to go public with all that irritation. The Saudi Prince Bandar bin Sultan said there will be, quote, a major shift away from the U.S. and that it will affect arms purchases and oil sales. And most recently, citing a protest against the U.S., Saudi Arabia refused a seat at the UN Security Council. So could an ally be turning into a foe? I spoke with Professor Daoud Kairalan.
The U.S. has invested a lot in the relationship with Saudi Arabia, and now Saudi Arabia is threatening the U.S. I mean, talking oil supplies and all. Where is this alliance going?
Well, the U.S. has paid a heavy price by supporting Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and many of the Gulf countries are probably the most undemocratic, the most corrupt, and they are really a liability, and they have contributed to the sense of alienation between the U.S. and the Arab world. So for Saudi Arabia, especially Mr. Bandar, to take this position is a little bit astonishing. But I don't think that there will be a total disconnect. But if there will be one, it will be in the best interest of the U.S. on the whole. And the U.S. would not be associated with a country that is a generator of terrorism. It will not be associated with a leader like Bandar, who is playing a major role in the bloody war going on in Syria and supporting terrorists.
The U.S. now downplays this shift with Saudi Arabia, possibly thinking that the Saudis are not going to go too far. But the U.S. has underestimated such dynamic before with Saddam Hussein. He was an ally at one point with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and other folks. So in this case, it all depends on how far Saudi Arabia is actually willing to go with this snub. In Virginia, I'm Guyanay Chichikan.
Hey to the Dubai debates. I'm very sorry I can't participate. I'm in Australia and I'm unfortunately a little limited by the time difference. But it sounds incredibly interesting and very, very useful what you're going to be discussing. Both, of course, what is going to happen in the regional issue of what are you going to do after oil and gas, although I wouldn't worry too much because that is pretty far off, but also that you're going to be talking about nuclear and you're going to talk about energy in general and, of course, renewable energy. My pitch on this issue, and that's going to be my 2 cents worth in your conversation, is really that we need to recognize that the current approach that we're following just doesn't work. We're so focused on getting a few solar panels up on our rooftops that it makes us feel good, but because they're still vastly more expensive, they are not actually going to solve anything. They're just simply going to be niche products that make Western governments and other feel-good governments feel good, but it's not actually going to cut into the real emissions of CO2. So what we need to do, instead of focusing on subsidizing inefficient technologies like solar panels, and that has been the policy over the last 20 years, and it has failed as such. What we need to do is instead focus on dramatically ramping up investment into research and development in making those technologies much cheaper. Imagine if we, over the next 20 to 40 years, could make renewables, could make solar panels cheaper than fossil fuels. We would have solved the problem. Everyone would move, also the Chinese and the Indians and everyone else. Not because they were green, not because they were forced to, but simply because those technologies were cheaper. So the solution is, yes, go on with what we're doing right now, which unfortunately means using a lot of fossil fuels because they power everything we like. But dramatically ramp up investment in research and development into green energy technologies so that over the next 20 to 40 years, we will be able to make an energy transition. It's much cheaper than what we're proposing today. It's much more likely to lead to an energy revolution. And ultimately, of course, it's much more likely that if the economics is right, that we will actually transition to a post-fossil fuel economy. Those are my 2 cents. I wish you all the best in Dubai with your debates, and best of luck here from Australia. Take care. Bye.
I suppose that where I disagree with what Bjorn Lomborg said there was that he dismissed solar power, for example, as people putting a few solar panels on their rooftops, and it's a feel-good thing rather than anything substantial. But of course, this is one region of the world where indeed it can be something a hell of a lot more substantial. The sun, the space, and all the rest of it. Clearly, there are challenges such as, for example, that the sun shines at slightly the wrong time for when the grid needs energy, i.e. in the evening. But there clearly are opportunities here that could be exploited with a bit of imagination, and I was very interested, just by way of example of some of the things that are already going on. A couple of weeks ago, or even last week, Alex Salmond, the First Minister of Scotland, was in town and doing quite a sort of heavy pitch to the Emirati authorities about renewable energy, and his pitch very simply was, look, you've got a lot of sun here, solar can be a big game for you, we've got a lot of wind in Scotland, wind and wave power can be big for us, we've also got technical expertise, you've got capital, why don't we work together, and we can take advantage of your capital, our joint expertise, Scottish universities with excellent research facilities and all the rest of it, and develop new techniques in renewables which are transferable across different industries. Now, he's a politician, of course, he knows how to make a compelling pitch, but it sounded a very interesting idea, and obviously at a very, very early stage. But it's an idea, it gives a sense, I suppose, of how people on both in the Gulf and outside are thinking about these things right now and moving beyond the fossil fuels.
Okay, what do you? I think we're seeing a change. I mean, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't have an oil-based economy so long as it is developed in a sustainable way. Because at the end of the day, this is what we have. You know, you have 60% of the world's oil reserves are in this part of the world. And you see divergences, you know, the politics of different countries that are different. Apart from Libya, which is a major oil producer, the rest of the Gulf, we haven't seen any trouble. So obviously something is being done right. I think we're seeing more concern now for preserving for future generations the resources that we have, as the Saudis have done, as I think the UAE is doing. It's a sort of bit of a paradox, because you can do that, but at the same time it means you're not investing in the future. In future capacity, which might down the road mean that oil prices spike. But that's another story we can go back to. Saudi Arabia has been throwing money at potential trouble, we're told, you know, more spending. But again, not a bad thing. We're seeing more social spending. We're seeing a diversified economy that is maybe oil and gas based, but we're seeing petrochemicals industry growing in this part of the world. We're seeing more downstream. We're seeing more job creation. As a result of this expanding. Well, we're seeing it all across, I think. We're seeing it in the region, because you're going from, you know, you're not just looking at upstream.
Some people might criticize that and say that it just re-emphasizes the rentier-state welfare model, and that the government is the employer of last resort, if you may.
No, management, no. But what I think is you are seeing in places like Iraq, you've got a lot of private sector investment now, because you've got a lot of foreign oil companies going in. So that's creating a totally different dynamic on the ground. And I think you use the strengths that you have. And at the moment, this is what we can use in order to make life better for our people.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with the efforts of the GCC countries to diversify their economies? 10 being...
5.
In a positive way.
5. 5.
Thank you.
Somewhere in between.
Thank you. Robin.
I think the answer to the question that was posed, you know, what's after oil and gas for the Gulf, is a lot more oil and gas, certainly over the next several decades to come.
So what are you, like 8?
Well, hang on, don't get me on diversification here, that's a whole other thing. But, you know, there's often this question about what is the post-oil economy in the Gulf, and for me, it's a bit premature to be asking that question. I say, you know, the last drop of oil in the world will come out of the ground in Saudi Arabia.
اوضاع سیاسی در قطر حساس شد. منابع خبری امروز از درخواست امیر قطر از حکام عرب خلیج فارس برای قطع رابطه با نخست وزیر این کشور که همزمان وزیر خارجه هم هست خبر دادند. نخست وزیر قطر این تصمیم حمد بن خلیفه آل ثانی امیر قطر رو ضربه از پشت و بی‌اعتنایی به خدماتش دونسته. امیر بیمار قطر که نگران کودتای داخلی در کشورش هست تصمیم گرفته در آینده نزدیک قدرت رو به ولیعهد 24 ساله این کشور منتقل کنه. قرار ولیعهد قطر در اولین گام تحویل کامل قدرت تا چند روز آینده علاوه بر ولیعهدی سمت نخست وزیری رو هم بر عهده بگیره. محافل دیپلماتیک از احتمال توطئه‌های خونین علیه شاهزاده جوان با توجه به این تصمیم امیر قطر خبر دادند.